This is World Cafe. I'm Raina Douris. Can you remember the way your imagination worked when you were young? Anything could become anything. A tire swing could be a time machine. A couple of trees in the yard could form the framework of a whole imaginary house. Now, as an adult, these things might sound silly or at least hard to picture, let alone believe in the way you would when you're a kid. PJ Harvey's new album, I Inside the Old Year Dying, is an exercise in fantastic imagination, the kind of imagination children have. It's based on a book of poetry she released last year called Orlam that she wrote in the Dorset dialect. The dialect, which PJ grew up around, adds to the music's otherworldliness. So do the recordings she gathered from near her childhood home. Nature sounds she and her producers manipulated in the studio to give the record an air of magic and mystery. PJ Harvey will talk about creating the world of the album, about connecting to her imagination and finding her love of songwriting again, and more coming up. Just a note, if you're listening on YouTube, licensing and label rules mean we can't play you full album tracks, just short clips, but you will hear PJ Harvey perform live, beginning with the title track from I Inside the Old Year Dying. This is PJ Harvey, live for the World Cafe. Live for the World Cafe, you just heard PJ Harvey performing I Inside the Old Year Dying, the title track from her latest album. My name is Raina Douris. PJ Harvey is my guest today. Welcome back to the World Cafe.
Thank you. It's good to be back here after so long.
I know. I'm so happy to have you here. I've been listening to this album, since it came out, but especially in the last little while as I've been getting ready for this interview and walking through the city now that it's getting dark early and the seasons are changing. It has made the streets of Philadelphia feel like this magical, mysterious world. It's really, really beautiful. So I'm so excited to talk to you about it. Folks listening closely to the lyrics of that first song we heard may have realized that they don't understand all of the words that you're singing because you wrote this album largely, or you wrote the book of poetry that it's based on largely in the Dorset dialect. And we'll talk about writing in that dialect in a moment. But if someone is hearing that song for the first time, could you roughly translate what you're singing about there?
Well, I think it's a very melancholy song of watching the year die. You watch everything's dying. The leaves are gone from the trees. It's cold. It's dark. There's no sun. It's brown everywhere. So it's this sort of loss and grieving for the year that's dying. But also the grieving and loss of the sense of self that feels like it's dying as well. We all know that melancholy feeling as winter approaches, don't we?
Yeah. The album is based on your book of poetry that you released last year called Orlam. Orlam tells the story of a year in the life of a young girl, Ira Abel, who lives in an imagined part of rural West England, a place maybe not unlike Dorset, where you grew up. Why is this a story that you wanted to tell?
Well, I'd written one book of poetry called The Hollow of the Hand, and in writing that book, I've been working with an editor called Don Patterson, who's a Scottish poet, a wonderful poet. And he became my mentor as I studied poetry further. So the first book, Hollow of the Hand, was on quite a different scale. It was on a much vaster scale of looking out to the world, to politics, to what was going on in wars. And so Don encouraged me to do the exact opposite, to change the scale to something very small. So we got one person, a village and a wood, and explore much more the internal landscape than the external. So that was the starting point. And initially, some of the early poems were just part of my coursework with Don, different exercises in styles of writing or forms of poem. And then quite quickly, I could see, and he could see, that a collection was forming itself. And some of those early poems, I'd experimented with bringing in dialect as I was writing about memories of being a child in a rural landscape. And it became a wonderful tool for writing with, because a dialectal word, it's like bringing in a parallel world to your poem. So, and it's a wonderful tool as a poet, because you also have the intimated sense of the word as well as the real sense of the word, which can be a double play. So, for instance, a word like wordle, which means world, we hear it as word. So you've got wordle, world, and that's like everything all wrapped up. And that also then moved me into the idea of the word, which became an overarching theme of the book.
Yeah, I mean, when you say parallel world, even when you look at the book, you've got the English translation of the Dorset dialect. It's such a delightful thing to read it out loud. Like I was reading some of it out loud to myself, and the words that you find, like twiddicks for twigs,
Yeah.
I really love.
They are such beautiful words, aren't they? Because they sound like what they are.
Yeah.
Like twiddick sounds like a twig.
It absolutely does.
Yeah. Which is also why I felt like it wouldn't be too much of a barrier for people, because, I mean, again, going back to songs, there's so many songs I can't, even people singing in English, I can't work out what they're saying, but it doesn't matter, because you make that word your own and it means something to you, and then it means, and that's different to what it means to other people. And I listen to a lot of foreign language music too, absolutely love it, and still get the sense and the emotion. So I didn't think it would be a barrier, more just an intriguing addition.
How often, because you did grow up in Dorset, how often would you hear the dialect? Was it something that you would hear people use?
Yeah, and still today, in the remote parts of the county, you still hear dialect. As a child, I heard it a lot from the elders in the village. A lot of the words I already knew, and some, yes, are still in use.
Yeah. I know that you're a very visual person and you love images, and I have never been to Dorset. I'm guessing many people in our audience haven't. What were some of the visual references that you were maybe using while you were writing this?
Well, I took a lot of photographs just on my phone, but I also had reference images from many other different sources, artists' work that I felt captured the magic of the landscape, or old Celtic drawings, lots of photographs that I'd taken of leaves on the forest floor and trees, lots of sheep's eyeballs and things that I'd pulled off the internet, and I'd have them sort of all around me on my desk, on my laptop. I'd often making drawings that were compiling these images whilst writing a poem, because that would often help me unlock the key to the poem, especially if it wasn't working. I think drawing for me is a way of bypassing the intellect, which can often be a way into a solution for a poem. Sometimes if you're just using your intellectual conscious capability, you can't get there. Sometimes it's much better to just use instinct, and the way to get there, I find, is through drawing.
Yeah. Yeah, I think we think in images first before we translate that into language.
Yeah.
I'll reintroduce you quickly. I'm talking to PJ Harvey today on the World Cafe. The next song we're going to hear performed live is A Child's Question, August. And there are lots of wonderful words in this. There are birds, there are dunnocks, sparrows, there are guckus, which are cuckoos, there are drushes, which are thrushes. It's recorded live for the World Cafe, PJ Harvey with A Child's Question, August. A Child's Question, August, performed live for the World Cafe by my guest today, PJ Harvey. It's a song from her new album, I Inside the Old Year Dying. I'm Raina Douris. One thing that I actually didn't know about you that I find very interesting is that you work on your creative work like it's a 9-to-5 job. You get up, you work regular hours, you study, you practice. How did you figure out that routine worked for you?
I figured it out quite early on because, I mean, I was so lucky. I went straight from school, straight into performing in a band. And that's been the rest of my life. So I've done it since I was 20 years old. And I really thrive on hard work. I always have. But then I realised I had to make my own structure because there's no one saying, it's not like having to go to college where like you have to be there at a certain time. So I needed a structure because otherwise it's quite hard to switch off. I mean, as a creative artist, you're always working, really. And it felt conducive to good work to me to sort of have a time when I would know my creative mind is switched on and a time when I switch it off. And that helps me not get too drained. But it also concentrates me and, and gets the work done. I think if I'd been more just responding to when I felt creative, it would all be it wouldn't have suited me as a person. I like to have a framework within which to work.
And so what happens if you walk in that morning and you aren't feeling creative and you're feeling totally stuck?
Well, those times can be really great learning times. If you're trying to work and something, this happens a lot, you can work for weeks and feel like you're getting nowhere, feel like you kind of know you're not doing good work. But at the same time, something is being learned and you're not going backwards. You are actually moving forwards. And I've learned to trust in that.
Could you talk about how this album began forming or sort of took root during that daily practice that you do?
Well, the book really came first. So the book took me about 8 years to write. It's a very dense book with a lot of different themes and a lot of different layers of meaning, which this is why it took so long. It took a lot of study, and I'd never written in such a narrative form before. So it took a long time to make sure the storyline lined up, something that's happening here early on. It has to also work with this that's happening over here. And that took a lot of balancing, a lot of sticky notes all over the place, and like diagrams with lines
between them.
So the book really was towards the end of being written, before the songs started happening. And like you said, I mean, I practice a lot. I practice guitar, I practice piano. I try and improve my skills at that, because I was never really formally tutored in either. It's just what I've taught myself. And so I still practice with chord progressions and scales, and try to get, I learned finger picking on the guitar, which I'd never learned before. So while I was finessing the book, I'm practicing, and I was starting to really enjoy some chord progressions I've been working on, and melodies would start coming. So I was just la-di-daring over the top. And instead of la-di-daring, I just pulled out a few poems, and they started to sing really well. And within a couple of weeks, maybe 3 weeks, I had about 16 songs that had been poems that had mutated from the book into a song. Sometimes the poems stayed almost exactly as written, and other times I'd edited them a bit.
Yeah. I'm talking to PJ Harvey on World Cafe. To create the sonic world of the story, outside of the words, you used a lot of field recordings, recordings that you made yourself, recordings that your friends who work in sound design gave to you. Where would you go to collect sounds when you were recording them yourself?
I would walk around Dorset with my Zoom microphone, and I'd also go to places that I'm lucky enough that my mum still lives in the house that my brother and I grew up in.
Oh, really?
From like babies, and that's quite rare, isn't it? Your parents stay living in the same house. So I knew of different haunts that I could go on where I would find the right sound of the river I wanted to record, or the right sound of leaves in the trees, or the right sound of the bells ringing from the local church. So I also knew where to go there. But like you said, I've got a lot of friends in theatre sound design now, from having worked in theatre quite a bit, and they were just amazing, because they had any specific thing I would ask for. Like, I really wanted the sound of wind blowing through barbed wire in November.
And they have that?
And they would go, oh yeah, and they give me 4 different options. Like, oh great. Or
That's
children in a playground, things like that.
That's amazing. Yeah, I wanted to ask what was the most specific sound, but that is incredibly specific.
Yeah.
That's amazing. I want to take a track. I want to take a song, Seam and I, from the album. You use nature recordings in here, but they're not always obvious. And that goes for the whole record. Could you talk about how you would use those recordings once you got into the studio?
Mm-hmm. Well, I knew initially I wanted to be able to play them. I liked the idea of, rather than just using them as straight nature recordings, can I play the sound of wind in leaves on a keyboard at different pitches?
Where you program
so
it
they could
into
become the basis of the song. So that was initially our intention. Having said that, I think we kind of didn't end up doing that, but because we quite quickly ended up on a different path that was exciting us all. So Cecil, who was working with Flood and John Parrish and I together, we would all be improvising in a studio room, or just one room together. And Cecil was in charge of playback of the nature recordings. What really was happening was he was setting an atmosphere in the room. And we had a nice atmosphere in the studio already, a bit like you've got here. The lighting was nice, the ambience was nice. And then suddenly a forest we'd be hearing the forest in the room, and John and I would start improvising together. I'd start singing. Flood would respond to what we were doing, and Flood always calls what he does sonic disturbance. So, and that is exactly what he'd do. He'd bring in one of his really early synthesizers, like one of the earliest models, that he would then send signal to the synthesizer of what John and I were playing, and then he would mess with that signal and feed back something into the room of this messed up signal that John and I would then start playing off of as well. So it was a wonderful, very improvisational atmosphere to be in.
Why was that something that was important to you, to have that spontaneity and that improvisation?
It wasn't what I was setting out to do in my head, but this is why I love working with John and Flood. We arrived at Flood's studio and there were microphones everywhere I looked. They were like under my seat, above my head, behind me, hidden under the amp. I thought, what is going on? Because that was when I realised that, okay, he's going to want to take everything live. We hadn't talked about it, we hadn't discussed it, but Flood always likes to be fully ready. He records everything because he knows that there's often magic when you're just sound checking something. Like the whole album sounds like it's in an intimate, sheltered space.
Before we go too much further, I'm just going to call for a clip. I want to play a bit of Seem and I before we, so people know what we were talking about with the sound.
You hear sonic disturbance from Flood very well in that one.
Here is Seem and I.
Seem my childhood of Quaterial wormwood, of not friends running nowhere.
From her new album, I Inside the Old You're Dying, a bit of Seem and I from PJ Harvey, my guest today on the World Cafe. I'm Raina Douris. We are going to hear you perform another live song for us in a moment, I Inside the Old I Dying. First, I do want to play a bit of the album track because there's a story behind how you recorded the vocals for this song with Flood. And it sounds, to me, when I listen to the song, it sounds like you are lost in a foggy woods. Could you explain how these vocals were recorded in the studio?
Most of the vocals were put down when I was playing guitar and playing with John, and so you get the ambience of the entire room going down the mic, the drums, the guitar, but it stopped me over singing because I was concentrating on trying to play. I'm listening to John, we're improvising, everything's changing every second, so I was very connected to the song and to the moment, and I think that's why I feel I did some of my best singing on this record. And John and Flood and I are always on the lookout for not repeating ourselves. We didn't want me to be sounding like just a way of singing that I'd used many times before. And so it was another way of getting away from that. There were a couple of songs that I overdubbed the vocal to. And when we did that, we also did that in a different way. And I remember one of them, I think it might have been, I was going to say I Inside the Old I Dying, I'm not sure, but Flood made me shut my eyes and he held the microphone so that I couldn't see where it was. And I think he did that to sort of disarm me, to get me back into the present moment, instead of thinking too much about, oh, I'm doing the real vocal. And, you know, and it was just, oh, well, I can't see anything. And all I was doing was listening. And it was quite different.
I'm going to play a clip of the album version of that song, and then we'll come back and we'll hear the live performance. This is I Inside the Old I Dying.
The beech buds wave, the ash buds wave, the frogs and toads and blackwood owls, hedgehogs and...
That was a bit of the song I Inside the Old I Dying from PJ Harvey's latest album, I Inside the Old Year Dying. That song has a very similar name to the title track. That song is set in November, the title track. This one is set in December. How are those two songs connected?
Again, it's the transformation of our heroine.
Yeah.
That, you know, the girl, boy, 9-year-old, he is leaving their childhood. First of all, it's a mirror of what's happening in the season and the year. The year is leaving in November. The year is dying as we move towards the following year and the start of a new year. And then as we are in December, the child is leaving. So there's the I. The I is dying and moving into the adult.
performed live for the World Cafe, I Inside the Old I Dying. It's PJ Harvey.
The beach buds wait, the ash buds wait, the frogs and toads in lagwood holes, and hedgehogs in their leafy ditch, all waiting for his kingdom. And the earth waits, and the dead breaks that host the holly's bloody beads. They are his crown of thorns, he will rise again. Oh, Wyman, oh, Wyman, unray I for him. Oh, Wyman, unray I for him. Slip from my childhood skin, I singing through the forest. I hover in the hallway, laughing to the leaves. Oh, Wyman, unray I for him. Oh, Wyman, unray I for him. I laugh in leaves and merge to me, just a charm in the oak, with the chalky children of evermore. 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 The chalky children of evermore.
PJ Harvey, I Inside the Old I Dying, recorded live for the World Cafe. My name is Raina Douris. PJ Harvey is my guest today. There are many characters in the poems and in the songs. We've talked a bit about how you recorded vocals. How do you think about inhabiting different characters? What are there techniques that you use? Are there things that you think about?
I've been lucky enough to work with a theatre director in England for many, many years. He's called Ian Rickson. And I work with Ian in composing music for his plays. And I've done that for like 14 years now. But Ian also works with me on my live shows with my band. And he coaches us as he does his actors. One of the things that Ian had taught me, and is such a wonderful help, is that if I see the scene, then the audience will see it. If I see it, you'll see it. And it's the same with hearing. If I see the scene as I'm singing, you will see it as you hear it. It's as simple as that. So as I sing the songs, I am almost seeing it as a film moving of all the action that's happening. I see it in front of me.
Oh, I love that. That's
And
beautiful.
that is the key into getting the right emotion.
Yeah. One of the things, to continue with voice, one of the things that I've seen you bring up in a few interviews, and it's something that's come up when I've talked to artists before, especially women, is the richness and character that your voice gains as you get older. What changes have you discovered in your voice that you really love?
I've developed a richness and a roundness and a wholeness to the voice. I think that's two reasons. I mean, I think as we get older, we become more self-accepting. We get a much greater idea of who we are, and there's less fighting going on within oneself. There's a greater openness, and I think with that openness also means you have greater access to a wider energy, like a wider support, and the voice thrives on that. And then the other thing is really just the physical changes that happen. I think, we know that our body just changes, and that's not just the body, it's every single tissue and muscle. The voice, the vocal cords are controlled by the muscles. They've changed, and the way I use them has changed. And it's both those things. It's the emotional landscape and it's the physical landscape somewhere meeting that gives this voice a different richness and clarity.
Yeah, it's interesting to be, I guess, telling this story where you're telling the story of a 9-year-old girl, but with that added richness that you've discovered in your own voice. I'm speaking with PJ Harvey on World Cafe. You've been making music for pretty much your entire adult life, and even before that, since you were 16, 17 years old. I understand that a few years ago, you started to wonder if you wanted to continue doing it for the rest of your adult life. When did you start to feel disconnected from music and start wondering about that?
Yeah, I think it was a slow process. I can remember whilst I was writing the Hope 6 Demolition Project album, which was the album prior to this one, it felt hard work. I had to really graft to get anything good, and that seemed to continue. And even the songs that I was writing, I felt like they were just missing the mark of what I really wanted to be doing. And it was just such a struggle, and it was not enjoyable. I thought, I'm not enjoying this. This is feeling more like homework you've got to do than the love of my life. And I just kept thinking, keep working through it, just work through it, it'll pass. And it didn't really. Also, moving into my 50s, I think it's also quite a natural age where both men and women are going, okay, I've got this far doing this with my life. Do I really want to keep doing this?
Sure.
Or is there something else that you see a finite amount of years left. You're entering like the third section of your life. And this is it, really. What am I going to do for the next 30 years if I'm lucky? And we know how fast that time goes. Blink and it's gone. So I really just wanted to really just step back a bit and think, okay, what do I want to do with my remaining years? Is it this still? And that was the question I had to ask myself.
I think it's a frightening idea to feel like you're losing that connection, but it's also, I think, such a relatable feeling no matter what line of work you're in.
Yeah, no matter what work you're in.
Yeah.
So.
And I did you give any thought? I mean, obviously you found that reconnection. We'll talk about that in a second, but did you give any thought to what you might do instead? Were you thinking, I would focus on my visual art or my writing, or was it something completely different?
I think because I'd already begun this relationship with poetry, which I love, I find it endlessly fascinating. I felt like, okay, maybe I'm a poet and I'll just be a poet. And the idea of just working at that was very satisfying to me. Like I said, I work quite a lot with theatre scoring. I love theatre. I love drama. I love working with actors and directors. So I thought, well, maybe that's what I'll do. I'll be a composer and I'll be a poet.
But you're doing all of those things still. You can do them all.
Well, yeah, I guess that's what I've realised is that, and that is, again, something lovely that I think one learns as you get older, that it's not so black and white. Things just aren't black and white. There's a lot of grey in between. And it doesn't have to be that I'm just doing this one thing or I'm just doing this other thing. You can do a lot of things and it can all be a bit mixed up, and they do all sort of bleed into each other.
Yeah. I mean, how did writing Orlam help you reconnect to that?
I think I think although intellectually I felt I'd got out of touch with music, I think at a deeper, more instinctual level I hadn't, without realising it, because a lot of the poems I wrote for Orlam, they carry within them melodies, really, and a lot of them were in my head, they were to the tune of different songs, and some of them just naturally sang. They just sang themselves.
I'm speaking with PJ Harvey on World Cafe. Your mom kept all of your drawings since you were little. And I didn't realize this till you got here, but the guitar that we're hearing you play for these live performances is the guitar that you were playing when you were 16 years old. Is that the guitar your mother gave you?
It is, yeah. It was my first guitar that my mum bought for me when I must have been about 16. She bought it from someone in the village for £100. It's a great guitar. It's a Yamaha acoustic. It's just beautiful. And yeah, so that was the guitar that I would have written my very first songs on. Some of the really early songs were written on it. Sheila in a Gig was written on it. It's before I had an electric guitar, and I think my mum knew because I remember my mum teaching me recorder when I was about 4, and mum says, you know, I was able to play better than her within like the first lesson. It's just, and I would sing melodies back from the radio as a tiny child, and I started writing poems and doing drawings when I was. My earliest memories are of these little books that I had that were they were little exercise books. You'd have lines at the bottom and a space to draw
I
at the
remember
top.
those, yes.
Yeah, and they were the lovely little small, like half A4 size. And my mum kept all of them. And so from a really early age, I'm a storyteller. You know, I'd write a story and I'd draw it. Yeah. And then as soon as I could, I'd start singing them. Yeah.
Having that guitar with you, it feels like a very tangible way of reaching back to find that connection again with music as well.
Yeah, it's an important guitar to me, that one. I feel very at home when I'm playing it.
We're going to hear you play it some more in a moment. The last song we're going to hear you perform today, it's also the last song on the album. It's called A Noiseless Noise. It ends with the lyrics, "Go home now, love, go home now, love, leave your wandering." And it begins and ends with the sound of bees. First of all, I guess, why bees?
Well, it was one of the field recordings we'd collected. And again, wanting to create the atmosphere of being outside somewhere. And the actual sound, the sort of, it's almost sounds like a bit like distortion. And on the album, we distorted John's voice in such a way and got him to sing in such a way that it knits together with the sound of the bees. So John almost sounds like a bee, which provided Flood and I and the rest of us with enormous entertainment, of course, when it was being put down. But I think it works really well. It sort of glues everything together.
Yeah. Why did you choose to finish the album with this song?
I think the way the song turned out and that sort of rush of energy that it became, and quite an angry energy to it, it almost felt like it doesn't feel like a closing of the door. It feels like stepping into another room, and almost like opening the door to where I'm going to go next.
Here is A Noiseless Noise, performed live by my guest today, PJ Harvey, on World Cafe.
Absence, absence, absence. Cold moon comes down, curdling, curdling through reddening leaves that are falling, falling, falling reddening. each path uphill and stumpy, chalk and embers, the end of summer. Reap the river, tongue of silver. Come away, love. Come away, love. Come away, love. And leave your wandering. Just a noiseless noise, just a girly girl, just a bogus boy. Trace the fields of peace unto a clamor of not sleeping. Go home now, love. Go home now, love. Leave your wandering.
On the World Cafe, you just heard a live performance from my guest today, PJ Harvey. That song is called A Noiseless Noise. It's from her latest album, I Inside the Old Year Dying. Polly, thank you so much for this conversation.
Thank you. It's been an absolute pleasure to talk to you. Thanks for asking such great questions.
Thank you for answering them. I'm Raina Douris, back in a moment with more World Cafe.